and I am so glad you're joining us today. No matter what it may be like for you in these challenging times, remember that God is in control. For those of you who are first-time visitors, we give you a very special welcome. Our global show features up-close and personal interviews with individuals from all walks of life who share their stories about encounters, extraordinary miracles, and blessings that can only be attributed to a God's hookup. Make sure to like and share with your family and friends. Thank you for joining us, and God bless you. Welcome to God's Hookups. This is Dr. Barbara Young, and welcome. Today, my second guest on the show is Miss Kadrina Hurd. She is a social reformer who is currently serving as a prevention manager at the Community Coalition in South Central LA. And what this coalition does is works to identify solutions to address and tackle the root causes of addiction, crime, and poverty. She is a recent graduate of the Los Angeles African American Women's Public Policy Project. Congratulations, Kadrina. This is a young woman who has always had unexplainable divine interventions in her life that have developed her ability to constantly activate the power of choice, which I believe is one of the most important gifts that God has given us. So, Kadrina, welcome to the show. And I want you to say hello to everybody out there. Yes.
Thank you so much. Hello, everyone. I am so grateful for this opportunity to share my multiple God hookups. But I really, like Dr. Young said, I really want to highlight the divine interventions in my life that have always allowed me to master my circumstances. And so I'm going to take us back 6 years ago, and I'm going to highlight a 3-year period in my life from 2014 until 2017. And so I spent those 3 years operating outside of myself. And for those of you who are listening, I don't know if you've ever looked in the mirror and you just couldn't recognize the person who was looking back at you, your reflection. Those 3 years, I was a machine. I couldn't tell if I was coming or going. Everything was robotic. And so just for some context, in 2014, I decided to reattempt my master in social work. And so the very first day of my graduate program, I found out that I was pregnant, and I was only 25 years old. And so I was in grad school. I was a new mom. I had just started a demanding career in education equity, only 25 years old. First generation college graduate as well. So I didn't have a blueprint. Everything that I was going after, I was the first to achieve. And so I had to figure out a lot of things along the way. I was also in a very toxic and unhealthy relationship during the time. And I just took on a lot of responsibilities. I was like the head of my household at 25 years old. And I was taking care of my father as well. And so I remember just coming and going. I would leave home at 6:30 a.m. and would not return until 10 p.m. And when I would get home, I just didn't feel at home. And so that caused me to begin to search for myself outside of myself. And that looked like making reckless decisions and indulging in self-destructive behaviors. And I was no longer standing firm on my principles. And so I just remember those 3 years, I kept telling myself, like, I just want to be free. I just want to be free. I don't know how to get it. I just know that I want it. And then I also thought that my path to freedom and liberty relied in somebody else. that it was somebody else's responsibility. And so that caused me to stay in unhealthy relationships. That caused me to put others before myself. That caused me to, as I mentioned, just continuously operate outside of myself. And so I remember just going to my source, going to my center and saying, I don't know who I am. If you remove all of these titles, if everything was stripped from me, I couldn't tell you who I was. And I just want silence. I just want freedom. And that's when that divine intervention came in and stripped everything from me. As soon as I graduated from graduate school, I became unemployed. As soon as I graduated from graduate school, I encountered a moment where I had to part ways with my father, and that was very painful. It was a very traumatic experience. Having taken on this responsibility to care for him and then be put in a situation where I had to ask him to leave because it was no longer healthy for myself or for my son. And then I made the decision to walk away from an unhealthy and toxic relationship because I knew that if I stayed, that those experiences would inform my son's childhood and manhood, and he didn't deserve that. And so all of these things that I held on to, all of these friendships that I was holding on to, this relationship, being responsible of a parent, everything that I was just holding on to, God stripped it away. And I was just left with myself. And that was the best thing that could have ever happened to me. Having the ability for my universe to be silent, for me to connect to who I am. I had to revisit all of those childhood traumas and experiences that showed up into the choices and decisions that I was making during that time. And I had to get real with myself. I had to take self accountability for my choices and my actions. And I really had to get to the root of who I am. And I just remember one particular time where when I knew that a change had to happen is when I told myself as a young woman, mind you, I had no tools, no guidance. I had to learn as I went along, but I made a commitment to myself that I would never entertain or engage with someone who was in a committed relationship. But during those 3 years from 2014 to 2017, when I was just going through all of this hell and all of this chaos, um, I began to indulge in a relationship with a person who was committed. And I remember feeling so low and feeling so horrible and just it was bad. Yeah, I just felt completely disconnected from myself and I felt disgusted and I had all of this internal turmoil. And from that moment forward, I made the decision and I told myself, this isn't okay. This isn't healthy. Everything that you said you didn't want to be or wasn't going to do, you are now doing. So you have to change. And when everything was stripped from me, when everyone was stripped from me, when I was no longer the amazing graduate student, when I was no longer the head of my household because I could no longer provide for me and my child, when I was no longer the friend that everyone was able to come to for advice or for support, when all of those things were gone, I was just left with myself. And through that journey, I found myself. And I found my values and I found integrity and I found all of these principles and I found my worth and I figured out who I wanted to be and I committed to being that person and I went after it with no apologies. And so I'm just always grateful that the divine force, whenever I've encountered a circumstance that was completely humbling and very low, that the divine source spoke to me and said, sister, this may not be where you want to be, but here's an opportunity to master your circumstances. Here's an opportunity to rise up because you are called upon and this is your time. And when I took that leap of faith and decided that I can be who I know that I've been chosen to be, everything else changed. And I'm just so grateful that whenever I was presented with an opportunity to do better, I listened to that voice and I accepted the challenge. And so every God hookup in my life has been those divine interventions that have allowed me to choose better and do better. And so thank you so much, Dr. Young.
You know, Drina, you have such a compelling story, and because I met you in entirely different circumstances, I was so impressed with your eagerness to learn. What was there any specific thing? Because I wrote a little note of how you realized that you were listening to something that was positive, telling you something positive. Did you recognize that as a God's hookup at the time, or was this in retrospect? You felt that you were.
It was definitely in retrospect. So I heard this voice, you know, that internal voice. Some women call it their intuition, right?
Uh-huh.
And so I felt that intuition every time that I was making these poor choices and self-destructive decisions. That was that my intuition saying, "Come on, sister, do better. This is not you. You're better than this." But I would ignore it, and then I would rely on my own understanding.
Right.
Right. But once I began to say, I'm just tired of the pain and I'm tired of going through the circle and the motion and the trauma, I realized that that was the divine giving me the opportunity each moment to rise above. And so, yeah, like in retrospect, I knew that it was the divine that always intercepted during those moments when I was about to make a reckless decision.
That's good. I mean, because how many of us can say, you know, we didn't heed the voice, we didn't heed that intuition, and there was a book written by a woman by the name of Hannah Whitehall Smith, a Quaker, wrote this book in the early 19th century, and what she said, and when I read that book, it stopped me and prompted me. What she said in that book was mind the checks.
Mm-hmm.
Mind the checks. And she used the analogy of coming to a red light. The light is red.
Mm-hmm.
It's like stop.
Stop.
And there's no yellow. It's stop or go. I haven't found God giving me a yellow. Slow down. Well, slow down. But the red, and she said, mind the checks because you will feel something. So what have you felt? All of these divine interventions you have had. How would you compartmentalize them into something that you would share with that 25-year-old woman today, or even the 22-year-old? Because they're trying to navigate, and in spite of all of these challenging times that we're living in now, this is like no other time in history that anybody can recall living through. How can you compartmentalize all of that when you give a good message to somebody out there who's not minding the checks?
You know what? I would say trust yourself. Because there were many times when that divine would speak to me and tell me, stop. But I would go. I wouldn't trust that inner voice. And each experience continuously escalated until I no longer had the choice to keep divulging in that behavior. And so my advice to my 25-year-old self 6 years ago would be, Kadrina, trust yourself. Trust that voice. And it's okay to be in solitude. Idle time is the devil's playground. But if you shut your world off, you know, I disconnected from social media for 4 years.
You did.
I did. I mean, I became a recluse. but it was needed because, as I mentioned before, I was searching for Kadrina and other people and friendships that I knew were not genuine friendships.
Mm-hmm.
By giving myself, my body away sexually to people who didn't honor me and only honored what I thought was my worth at that time. Right. And then feeling, because I'm first generation, and because I am the first in my family to acquire or accomplish goals that are that brings in a sufficient amount of finance, I felt responsible. I thought that I had to take care, that it was my responsibility to care for a parent who wasn't in a environment to be self-sufficient. And so I mean, 3 years of operating outside of myself, the best thing that I could have done was to just remove myself from everything and trust that everything that I needed was within me. I didn't need a relationship to define who Kadrina was. I didn't need an executive title to define who Kadrina is. I didn't need a relationship to define me. I just needed to define me for myself. There's a quote by Audre Lorde that I swear by that says, if you don't define yourself for yourself, you'll be crushed into other people's fantasies about you and eaten alive. And that's what I was experiencing. I was letting everyone define me based on their perception of my outer appearance, but internally I was dying and I was tired of it. So to my 25-year-old self and to all the 20-year-olds, trust yourself. The time is now. Now that we're dealing with this global and public health crisis, the time is now to silence your universe and get back to yourself and figure out the root of who you are. And I also was able to realize that the very things that I was trying to hide, I always tell folks when they ask me, like, where are you from? And I always say, well, you know what? I'm from poverty because I didn't have my own room until I went to college at 18. I bounced around from place to place. But I remember my freshman year at Grambling State University, I didn't want anyone to see that. So I began to wear all these masks to try to cover up my upbringing until I realized that my upbringing, once I confronted it, is what liberated me and what gave me and what gives me my superpower, because it comes with the perspective that is needed when I begin to enter into these spaces that lack diversity. And so, yeah, like, I mean, the beauty of all of my divine interventions, the overarching message has been to love yourself and to know yourself. And once I began to do both of those things, I evolved and transformation came. And I began to attract everything that I always wanted.
Isn't that I such a beautiful story. And I'm so glad you shared it, because there have been many, I'm sure, still out there wanting to deny their background, deny their heritage, deny their upbringing, deny that I was poor, and but that transparency is sort of, it's like cutting open and letting all that stuff run out, and there's freedom in that. And so, and there's freedom because God loved you, has purpose for you, has a purpose for you. I find it so fascinating. Why I wanted to have you on the show is because you have this incredible story, remarkable of transforming, becoming this beautiful creature, like the cocoon the caterpillar goes into, caterpillar pus, comes out, emerges as this butterfly.
I'm a butterfly, baby.
Some stuff. And then the fact that you have been able to still transition and transform, where you are helping in an organization to tackle some of the very things you experience, the root of poverty, causes of addiction and crime. And this is, I mean, really, it is like God-given in the sense that you're able to bring that to this particular organization. And I suspect you're going to bring a lot more, and you're going to do a lot more. Yeah. So I am so thankful for you to be on the show today and share your story. I mean, that's really something, going to Grambling. You don't want anybody to know where you came from. They said, where do you come from? Boston. A pretty white house with a picket fence. 2 parents. My mom cooked, and my dad loved my mom. Because we can fictionalize a lot of stuff and live in a dream world rather than the reality of what it really is, and hide and mask ourselves for so many years. But I just want to thank you for sharing how divine intervention and interventions have happened in your life. And thank you so much for sharing today. I really appreciate it. And I tell people all the time, if you think that there's still not miracles being made and that God is not creating them, oh, yes, he is, because you are one of them. So, listeners, I want to tell you that this has been truly an honor today to have Kadrina on the show. Kadrina Hurd, because you're going to hear more from this woman who has a name called Hurd. Have you heard of Kadrina? Well, you're going to hear more from her, I'm sure. And her future looks bright. And we want to thank you, too, for sharing. And thank you, viewers, for looking at the show. And don't forget to tune in. And if you'd like to be a guest on the show, you can contact me, Dr. B, at godshookups.com. And don't forget, watch this show every Friday at 11:30 a.m., 1:30 p.m., and 2:30 p.m. And I got some good news for you. We have got a lot of guys coming on the show, and they're going to be coming on. I mean, we got a plethora. I shouldn't say plethora, but we got a whole lot of men that are coming on. And so basically, if you'd like to contact me, it's crawling across the screen where you can contact Dr. Barbara Young. I'm on Instagram, Facebook, LinkedIn. I got Instagram. I did a little something on TikTok, so don't even go look at it. But, but anyway, I am having a ball. You know what? I just want to say it is a wonderful time to be alive, and it's time to dig deep and think about your divine interventions that are happening every day in your life. So I want to thank you for tuning in today. This is Dr. Barbara Young. I am going to sign off until next show, which is at 2:30 p.m. And again, Kadrina, love you much. Want you to have a blessed day. Keep on doing the good work that you're doing. Never, ever give up. Amen.
Thank you.
Well, thank you again for being on the show. And so, love you very much. And thank you as we say bye-bye to everybody. So you can wave bye-bye because this is Friday.
Happy Friday.
All right. Take care. And I'll see you next show, which is at 2:30. I have another guest, and we're going to say goodbye. All righty. Bye. Bye-bye. Okay.